For Americans, Joe Biden's trip is a shout-out to diplomacy. For his critics, it's a bugle call for the new Cold War. An alliance of democracies on one side and an axis of autocrats on the other. The question is, has this Cold War already started? Well, it's a tricky question. There is still no consensus on when the last Cold War started. We know it ended in 1991 because one party disintegrated, but when did it begin? You see, the Cold War is not a defined event. It is a series of tensions and conflicts. The threat of war is always in the air, but it never really breaks out. A lot like our world right now. Look at the South China Sea, look at eastern Ukraine. Massive build-ups, threats and counter-threats, but in the end, it just fizzles out. It is difficult to say if we are living in the second Cold War. But there are some similarities from the last century, like alliances. The first Cold War was split. In fact, the first Cold War split the world into two alliances. The NATO led by the United States and the Warsaw Pact nations led by the Soviet Union. Do these alliances still exist? Well, the NATO very much does. It was programmed to target the Soviets and later the Russians. Today, it is looking further east. Another communist state led by autocrats with global ambitions, China. The race is definitely underway. This time, the Democratic Alliance is not an Atlantic monopoly. This is not a white man's club of privilege. South Korea, Japan, India, Australia, they've all joined. And this gives the Democratic Alliance a lot more diversity and credibility. What about the other side? China can count on support from Russia, Iran, North Korea and Pakistan. We would have put Turkey on the list, but Turkey is still a NATO member. So Erdogan is a tough call to make. His politics matches China, but he wants to be part of the EU and he's surrounded by NATO members. Much like the last time, there are legitimate reasons for the second Cold War. China is denying democracy to 1.4 billion people. It is enslaving and torturing minorities. It regularly violates the sovereignty of countries in the neighborhood. Imagine this template all over the world. It would be a disaster, which is why a broad coalition has assembled against China. They have one thing in common, and that's democracy. It's easy to reduce this to a US versus China conflict, and to a large extent it is. But the world has changed a lot since the last Cold War. Take India, for instance. The Indian economy is 9 times larger than what it was in 1991. So America's role in the Cold War will have to be different. It cannot be the towering leader. Instead, Joe Biden must try and be an enabler. Bring democracies on the same table, make them understand the threat of China. That's his mission in Europe. Most countries in the Indo-Pacific have picked sides, but Europe is still on the fence. Why? Because Brussels wants to have it both ways. They want to trade with China, and at the same time, they want to compete with China. America's task is to dispel such notions. Before leaving for Europe, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post. And this is what he said. The world's major democracies will be offering a high-standard alternative to China for upgrading physical, digital and health infrastructure that is more resilient and supports global development. So while the world focused on his meeting with Putin, Biden was thinking about China. He plans to hold a summit of democracies later this year. His team wants this to be an in-person meeting. If the summit does happen, it will be a nightmare for China. Imagine the optics. Leaders from all democracies under a single roof. Such displays of unity are important, but they must not come at the cost of flexibility. There must be flexibility in alliance building. For example, a non-aligned country like India will never contemplate joining the NATO. The Quad alliance is perhaps as far as India will go. So America must invest more political capital in the Quad, because the NATO may have worked in Europe, but there is no such guarantee in the Indo-Pacific. So that's how the second Cold War may unfold. But waging a Cold War is one thing, ending it is a lot harder. The Soviet Union crumbled because the communist economy failed. No democracy, no prosperity. That was the takeaway. But China is very different. By the end of this decade, the Chinese economy may overtake America. Beijing has neatly packaged capitalism as some kind of hybrid communism. But the fact is, the Chinese economy is through and through capitalist. And this is where the Alliance of Democracies must wage an economic war. The Quad is already talking about its own supply chains. Chinese tech giants are being kept out of their markets. The Cold War comes down to a battle of systems. We know democracy beats Chinese communism. The next step is busting the invincibility of the Chinese economy, and that will be the real blow whenever it comes. So coming back to the initial question, is Joe Biden sounding the bugle call? Well, he's definitely got Cold War on his mind, but a bugle call? That was sounded years back by China. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.